Thanks, Dennison. Welcome to another Tech Talks with Sandidge today. We're going to discuss her journey in tech and just let her tell her story. Thanks for everybody for showing up and watching. So I'm going to first start with Nikala. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, give a brief background on what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you all for having me and this opportunity for your Tech Talk. My name is Sandidge. I'm a senior security specialist at the Walt Disney Company. I've been with Disney since April 2021, and my background is in cybersecurity.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more. So I guess we'll start from the beginning
Sure.
of your journey. Did you always know you wanted to be in tech?
I would say I had interest in tech after doing MySpace, right? So like I was thinking about things that I enjoyed doing day in, day out. And I think I discovered that in like elementary, middle school, early middle school. So yeah, it's crazy to think that we were coding back then. But really not having the mentorship, I didn't understand that I was doing front end development, which we know it to be now. But that's where my interest in tech came from. But I've always been a gifted student. So I was in like STEM programs. I was tested in elementary. So I was one of those students that left my school. So I went to Arlington for elementary and then merged into middle school. And so I would leave school and go to another school just to test my STEM skills, science tech, and I would say that was kind of where I had an edge, like, okay, I'm interested in something a little bit more than my day in, day out activities in school. And then I went to Brashear for high school. So I actually traveled around a lot, but I was still able, to maintain that gifted title, things of that sort. And I would say a lot of my tech skills were tested there as well. And I knew that I would probably be going to school for something in tech. I did not have mentorship, so I didn't know what to label it. Will I be a software engineer? I did not know. So I applied for computer science and computer engineering when I was going into college. And luckily, I did end up getting a full scholarship, full ride to Mississippi Valley State University for computer science. So I did have a keen interest in software, and computer engineering is more hardware. So again, I lucked up because I probably would have hated my major because I didn't know how to differentiate the two. And then that's where I pretty much tried to understand exactly what I wanted to do in tech. I was doing a lot of coding in undergrad. And I was like, okay, this may or may not be for me because I'm very analytical, overthinker, but I knew I could apply those skills elsewhere. So I decided to go to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, was where I received my master's degree in computer science with a focus in cybersecurity. I knew I wanted to help people, things of that sort, understand how technology advanced. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am today. I will tell you a little bit more about my career trajectory. So I had a few internships and stuff like that throughout college, but they were very software engineering focused. And that's what made me want to go to grad school. But then once I got into grad school, my first internship was with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And that's where I started, doing a lot of computer engineering or more cyber engineering work. And then that's when I'm like, okay, I really enjoy the work that I'm doing. I can educate my people on a day in, day out of how we use technology today, which I felt like there was like that piece missing, right? We use it, ease of use, everything is in your hand, always, social media, things of that sort, but people getting hacked. We're not talking about why we getting hacked, it's passwords, things of that sort. So I'm like, I can help people while also enjoying my job.
Okay, all right. So I had to. That was a lot. I have a bunch of questions on all of that.
Sure.
So we'll start. I want to go back still to the beginning. So you said MySpace, and then you said you were doing some front end work there.
Yep.
When you say front end, was it just the design of your MySpace page? Is that what
you're
referencing?
So like the coding on the back, right, will allow your page to look a certain way. So when you're manipulating that code, that CSS, the colors, people had the drop down letters and music. You can remove your, what we consider maybe like close friends now, like your favorite people, remove that. Because, if you have a lot of friends, you're like, okay, I don't want everybody on my page. So remove that. Have your favorite background song. All of that was coding. And what I know it to be today is that front end.
So like what age was that for you?
Oh my goodness. I had to be like 11.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
and then were there any other courses that you were taking at the time that besides MySpace, were you like, I know you said you
No.
were gifted,
Mhm.
but was your advanced math skills, or was there anything else that you were taking that was like contributing to that?
No, I would just say I was like more so self-taught and had that interest. So
Mm,
my uncle at one point was like, like when you go to school, you want to do something that you enjoy. Like, and I was staying up all
mm,
night long on my space, like figuring out my page. It was like almost like a weekly thing. Every 3 days I was switching it up. And I was like, I really enjoy this. And I felt like it was very much so self-taught. You figure out which websites to go to, YouTube was there, but we really weren't using YouTube as much to understand how to manipulate MySpace. It was just more so word of mouth, like, oh, go to here. I think it was like W3 schools. You kind of plug in your
yeah,
code,
yeah.
see what happens. And then, of course, you just learn by trial and error. Like things don't look the way you want them to, go ahead and fix it just by removing pieces of code and putting it back, changing up a few things or layering it a certain way. But I would say I was very self-taught. Again, crazy to think that I was coding back then, which a lot of people were, and probably
Right.
did not apply those skills to think that we were doing front-end development as children.
Yeah. And so, hindsight's 2020, now you're in the position that you're in. I guess two things I would say, well, I would
Mhm.
ask if there's a young lady or a young man out there and they don't have a mentor,
Mhm.
would you encourage them to continue to just play with the code, or what would you
Uh,
what would you
I
tell
would
yourself
definitely,
now
yeah.
that you're where you're at that may have, I don't know, sped up the process?
I would say I wouldn't say anything sped up necessarily for me, but I would say understand what you're doing, right?
Mm,
So I didn't
mm,
label what I was doing. It was just a fun activity, social media
gotcha.
back in the day for us, right? So it wasn't a label to anything that I was doing. But if I did understand what I was doing was front end development, that would have put me in a position to go into interviews young and say, I enjoy
Mhm,
front end development, or I want
gotcha.
to do something around visualization because this is what I enjoy. So yes, seeking a mentor to help you kind of articulate yourself is ideal because it's
Mm,
like I can listen to what you're saying, comprehend exactly what you're doing, and regurgitate and actually put a label to it, or
mm,
understand the description and say, okay, maybe this is what you're interested in. Even if I don't know all the answers, I can probably help you navigate those spaces in a
right,
sense, right? Because for me, it was
yeah.
just again fun. And going into college or deciding, okay, I'm gonna go to college for it. I still didn't know. I still
and,
didn't know.
and
It's crazy to think that. It came
yeah.
up right in a couple of my classes. I'm like, oh, this is what it is. Like,
Mm,
there's some books out there, right? I probably could have read when I was younger that would have helped me understand, like, this is what you really wanted to do. This is why you're in school.
gotcha.
I just knew it was computers, right? Like a lot of people have general ideas of what IT is. IT is very broad.
Right, right,
Going
right,
into
right,
school, computer science is very broad. So you have
right.
to really understand what you want to do in school so you can then put yourself in positions to, have internships and things that you think you like. Although, you may not like it, but you want to at least be able
Wow.
to state that this is what I'm interested in and learning and
Mhm.
willing to learn and then move around like that.
Gotcha, gotcha. How did you have the courage, or like, how did you keep going when you didn't know? So, like, one of the things we teach kids to code now,
Yeah.
and I feel like, you know, if you're exposed to it early, you can make those decisions a little bit faster. Like, maybe I want to try this, maybe I want to try that.
Yeah.
But I'm like always amazed at self-taught people because it's like you don't have anybody to ask the questions, and coding is not easy.
It's
So,
not.
how did you like? Where did that come from? And when you came to a problem and your code wasn't working and you couldn't, debug it, what did you do? Like, how did you figure that out?
I just kept trying. I'm a person, I'm pretty hard on myself, right? I'm gonna try to figure it out a million and one times before I finally ask somebody. So I'm like that person that'll fail so long, which I hate to say this, I learned later that you want to fail fast and ask questions fast so
Mm,
you can get to
mm,
that solution quicker,
right,
right?
right.
Instead, I beat myself up just trying to figure out a problem alone instead of collaborating with people to be like, how did you do
Right.
this? Like, of course it was word of mouth, like, what is that called? And then you kind of search it and like try to figure out like, oh, it's marquee dropping, right? So like little words dropping from the top of your screen is like marquee. So once you know like little terms like that, then you kind of do your own research. And I think some of those things I did. But again, it was a long process for me to eventually understand that I needed to ask those questions early on. And that would be my advice for anybody that is going through the process of not knowing. Try to understand exactly what it is so you can ask those questions like, hey, I'm running into this problem. And then being able to state exactly what that is to whomever you're collaborating with or working with, and do that faster, right? Don't wait, right? Don't wait until you have a D or an F in the class and you're like, okay, now I need a tutor. No, like you probably needed a tutor early on. And when I say computer science is not easy, it is not easy. So there's many times I feel like I could have gotten help or should have gotten help early on because I was trying to solve things on my own, right? Being a gifted student, having, 4.0 GPA, you feel like you can figure it out. Sometimes you need help. That's a completely different language, literally a completely different language. And so I started leaning on my peers a lot. Like, oh, you understand this, like without an issue. How did you get to this reasoning? Like, what is your deductive reasoning to even figure out a solution, right? And so I started to think like, wow, did I not think logically? Like I was trying to like over understand like what was happening. Like, why can't I just get to the solution like these other people? But to understand that again, their backgrounds are different, the way they process problems. Like I realized I'm very over analytical. So for me, I'm looking at the solution and not understanding how to break down the problem piece by piece. And then I realized once I started doing that, like, oh, okay, then you can get, better answers or figuring, the problem out sooner. But again, it took me a while to identify that. So now I'm like, if you have even that train of thought, which is not a bad thing, right? I say that's one of my strengths too, because I'm going to do above and beyond to even get to, solutions. Sometimes that might not be the right thing. So you might want to ask the right questions, but I will say just ask for help early on. You do not have to figure out everything alone.
So I got two questions. The first is, do you think being over analytical is a plus or a minus in the field? And then fast forward to high school, was there any courses that you took that would prepare you for the major in computer science, or did you you knew you had an interest and you went for it?
So to answer your first question, is it weakness or a strength in some ways? Because, like going through an interview, that's what they ask you, right? Usually that's one of those things like I'm already prepared for because I know myself. Going into an interview, you got to know yourself and be real honest with yourself. But what you do understand is that you have to kind of flip it. So being over analytical for me is a weakness, because I dig into a problem for a very long time before, again, I ask for help or I, try to come up with a solution because I'm just thinking of all the possible ways of solving it. But I also look at it as a strength because I'm going to go above and beyond to actually getting something done, right? So that person be like, oh, I have a problem. No worries. I already got the solution, trying to figure it out for you, doing 20 different things and then proposing it. That's just me though. And I know that in many ways, it's a mindset. Whatever you consider your weakness to be, you may want to figure out how is it also a strength. That's just going into any, interview. You want to kind of have that reasoning behind it because you like a weakness. Well, not punctual, like things like that. Like, okay, we really don't want that. But, again, it's through experience. You have to know how to flip it into a strength.
Got you. And then you said there weren't any courses in particular
No,
in high school?
Not in high school. I would say Bashir probably could have prepared me a little bit more, right, for the IT world or, going into computer science. But no, I just had those classes that could, prepare me for college in some sense, but they were the typical classes, physics, mathematics and all that. So I'm not sure what their curriculum looks like today. I haven't, stayed connected with the school in that sense, but I definitely feel like they need that. They need to start incorporating it because that's where we are, right? So a lot of schools, I know in Pittsburgh, we have like our School of Arts. So they tailor to those who like arts. And then we have some, now STEM focused schools, but like being in a public school, you just going about your day, going about life, really not knowing until the time is there.
Right. No, interesting enough, it's still the same. That's why we have the coding courses outside of the rec center or on the weekends. But interesting enough, though, Brashear is the one of the only public schools that have at least one course in coding. So I think they do something with code.org.
Okay,
But the whole school system does need tech and start to expose the
I
tech
agree.
early because social studies and stuff is not going to do it for us. Okay, so
No.
one more last question. Around that period, did you have a mentor? Was there anybody who I know? I think you mentioned your uncle,
Yeah.
but was there any mentor? Did you know a female engineer or a male engineer or something? You just were just
So
interested.
yeah, so my
Good.
uncle, he was technically in tech with the government at the time, but we just had general conversations like family, like you want to go to school. Okay, like you
Yeah.
do something that you like to do. Like it wasn't, hey, let's sit down and understand exactly what you would like to do. So you're choosing the correct major that's going to help you set up for success. I didn't have a mentor at that
Mm,
time. I wish I did. I
mhm,
truly wish I did. I didn't really have mentors, I was saying, until I got into my career.
mm. Interesting, interesting. So I guess my question too then would be, we're at college, so you're a freshman in school. Tell us what that's like. You're in tech. What does that look like?
It was tough. A freshman, it was tough. So I went to Mississippi Valley State University. I think I mentioned that. So this is a completely foreign space for me. Like my university was in between cotton fields, really. Like down the street is Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was killed. So I'm in a completely foreign space. I'm having to navigate more than just school. So it's like being out in a place alone. I have so much going on mentally. But I will say that in regards to curriculum, there are certain things that I just get, right? So math, I can solve a math problem, no problem. But like the intro, to computer science coding, some things I got, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Other things, Chinese, because it's just not innate. Like you just don't understand a language, right? Until you really have to go through the process of understanding exactly syntax and, how everything is paired, how functions work together, things of that sort. So there was a couple classes, I'm like, okay, yeah, I just don't understand. But, in that freshman year, that's kind of where you determine if you're going to stay in your major in some ways or you're going to leave. So I would say our class started out huge. And about the time I graduated, it was only like 8 of us.
What do you think some of those other students were missing that because that is a huge thing. And I guess I'll say, so I think part of the problem is the lack of exposure early. So to
Absolutely.
take that type of workload on in your freshman year, and like you said, it's the first time seeing a lot of stuff. And um, I just know a lot of people don't make it to that second year, definitely don't make it to that
It's
fourth
tough.
year. So
It's
what
very
would
tough.
you like if you can incorporate something or if you could change something, what do you think would have been the difference in that other 30 or 40 students that might, or maybe even more students that would have been in that class?
Like really just identifying the why, right? Like, so what's really stopping you or what's preventing you from understanding this curriculum? Like, sometimes it's just that discipline now. Like, if you're new in a space, you might just want to party. So that's different. So you kind of weed those individuals out like this is probably not for them at all. But then you have those that are really determined to learn and understand. I would say like, let's understand what exactly that you're missing, right? Again, it took me a minute to really understand, hey, I'm solving these problems the wrong way, right? But having those professors, talking to those professors, like through some of those things, because I think they can identify, that's what they're there for in some ways, like to identify those like weaknesses or areas that, they're not so strong in. I think those conversations need to be held, right? And then exposure to your point, right? I need to know what's out there as an array of opportunities for myself so I can start aligning myself with that. Like, I didn't know I was really interested in cybersecurity until my junior year. Why is that, right? So I think just showing us or showing the students exactly what they can do in this field will help them, start navigating those spaces early on, right? Because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing certain work or taking certain classes because, you can choose your classes in some sense. Some things are mandatory to take, but I may take extra classes so I can really do something I'm interested in. Because if you're not just interested in software engineering, you be like, I'm out. like, this is nothing that I want to do. And at some point I felt like that, like, okay, I'm having these internships, the work seems boring, I'm around introverts all day, like I like to collaborate, I feel like, I'm introverted but extroverted as well, like I need to work with people that like to talk, have a good time, have like conversations outside of work, and I was surrounded by people that just weren't like me. And it's because I was doing some work, and all my educational background, right, was tailored to those type of roles. So like to your point earlier, that exposure early on is definitely needed. Having, professors that are really invested in their students, I think is definitely needed, because, we're going through all these exercises, homeworks and all that. Can you identify by the way that a student answers a question exactly what they're missing, or you just give them an X? I mean, are we really learning from these things, right? Because these tools that they're using to evaluate how smart we are, if we're passing and things of that sort, if we're not learning from those mistakes or identifying those with our professors, because I think that's what, office hours should be for. Like, hey, I see you keep getting this wrong. Let me show you exactly why this is happening. But I don't think a lot of conversations like that are happening, because sometimes people just aren't invested in the growth or the mindset of students, and you just let them fail, and then they give up on themselves because they just feel like they just can't get it.
Now, excuse my ignorance on this. Your university, it was an HBCU?
It was an HBCU.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great,
so
great,
Mississippi Valley
awesome.
State is where Jerry Rice went. So a lot of people know to school for that. That and only that. Send a swag, that's it.
I got you. I got you. Do you think that made a difference? If you would have went into a PWI, do you think it would have been the same issue, or do you think that was more helpful? Did you feel like the atmosphere there was more helpful, or did you still kind of feel, I don't want to say alienated, but like isolated
I
in that
went through the
space?
HBCU all over again every time. That's why I went to pursue my master's degree at a HBCU, because I did know that the numbers matter, right? So I was told, and I may be wrong because I've never went to a PWI, but you go to a larger institution, you're just going to be a number. You're not going to be a name. I could go to my classes and everybody knew me by name. Oh, Nikila's missing. Oh, because they know their students. So there's definitely a stronger connection there. But I will say, like, I had professors that did not speak the best English, right? So trying to understand them and them trying to understand how they can help me better sometimes just wasn't always the best thing. But I did have, people like my department chair, who has, now passed. She was definitely invested in her students, right? She was like, there's definitely positive reinforcement in seeing these kids grow. So she was like, you study hard, you work hard for these 4 years, like you set yourself up for success, and surround yourself around people that are on the same track as you. Like, these are going to be your roommates. You probably don't want to spend time with people that aren't invested in the same thing as you. I'm like, all this paved out. But again, there are those classes where I had to have teachers who did not, again, speak English, that could not probably help me as much as I can help myself, unfortunately. So I can't just say the entire atmosphere was bad. I said that to say, hey, like, there's not this completely negative outlook on HBCU, because there is great things that come out of being an HBCU student. But I will say it's hard, because if you don't have people that look like you in certain spaces, they can't speak, again, that same language. I say that, wow, what a fun word, but it's just like they can't speak that same language as you. But these are the people that you have to rely on for your success.
Got you. Got you. So walk us through that. When is your aha moment? When do you know you want to get into cybersecurity? You take the first year, it's rough. Sophomore year, what does that look like? And then I think you said your junior year is when you were like, okay, this is what I want to do. How did you know? Was it a project you were working on? How did you know that was it?
Sophomore year for me, it was, so again, I had a full ride. So I had an academic scholarship. Everything is leaning on me doing well, keeping the scholarship, because my parents are not paying for college for me. So even when things were tough, I just felt like I had to continuously grind. So sophomore year, now I'm relying more on my peers, because I do understand that I cannot figure this all out by myself. So now I'm doing more office hours. I'm working, in a lab a lot. that was a thing, like, like partying is one thing, but the lab was another, like most nights for us. Just because that space was made available to us, definitely did more of that in my sophomore year. But I also decided to join a sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So that was something else, right? I'm like, okay, I'm still social, right? But also this computer science student, that was crazy. I would say like my focus kind of shifted, right, for the time of, going through the process of becoming an AKA, but brought it back because I still have to keep my scholarship. So that sophomore year, I did well. I maintained, again, my GPA as I should have. It never dropped below a 3 point, I think it was like 3.25 or something like that. So I still did what I needed to do. Again, difficult, but we made it happen. Now we're in the junior year. And I want to say it was like a computer security class that I took. And I'm just like, oh, like this terminology is easy to understand. I can comprehend all of this. Wait, and it's still integrated in the work that I'm doing. I think I need to start, looking into what cybersecurity is. And so I start positioning myself like, okay, I need to get an internship in cybersecurity. That was the thing. So in my department, you maintain certain scholarships by getting an internship. So there was, again, a positive reinforcement by the department chair, like, this is what we're doing here. We're making money in the summer. You coming back, you have money. This is everything that was kind of taught to us. But also for me, it was, I wanted the exposure and experience to see what I wanted to do in this world. So now I'm like, okay, I think I like this, but they didn't have any of those opportunities. So I was at the Naval Research Laboratory that summer of my junior year. And I found out that they had cybersecurity there, but they just didn't have those internship opportunities available. So I started networking a little bit. I'm like, what do y'all do? What are the positions? Like, can I understand? So I did have an opportunity because I was there to ask those questions in that department. And I think they were talking about like auditing, maybe penetration testing, things like that. I'm like, okay, like that sounds cool. Auditing, I kind of want to travel. So I want to do auditing. Didn't know what auditing was, but it sounded cool. So now I'm like, okay, I kind of have an idea what I want to do in this world. Not necessarily, because it was, again, based on others' experiences and lack of exposure. I probably could have done more research and been, again, more invested in myself into figuring that out. But I was just kind of going about things as, hey, this is the education that I have. This is what aligns with the education that I have. Because again, I'm very hard on myself, right? So I'm doing the outlining of bullet points with these roles. Okay, I don't have any of this. Right. And then most times it says you need 3 to 5 years of experience to even have this title. I'm like, I'm just coming out of school. Okay, so this isn't going to work. So my senior year, I'm like, I really need an internship in cybersecurity because now, so one of my peers, one of my best friends, actually, she has a cybersecurity internship at Aerospace, and the projects that they're doing are nice. I'm like, oh, wow, like you looking at drones, data, and all this stuff. I'm like, I want to do that. So again, I'm trying to position myself to, once I get out of school, to get into cybersecurity. Guess what? Luck was not on my side at all. I did not get one internship in undergrad in cybersecurity. Yeah, because I went back to the Naval Research Laboratory where I knew I had, guaranteed internship. The money was there. The location was great. I'm very familiar, with the program, but I just did not have the opportunity afforded to me.
So you never got to intern. How did you keep the dream alive? Like what happened during
Just
that process?
because it's like, I know it's either someone's going to consider me just because I have a tech background, right? Because that's possible, right? You start to align some of your skills, like, okay, you can program, maybe you can do certain cybersecurity tasks, but not maybe what I'm interested in. So it was either by luck or I needed to go to grad school. Grad school was definitely plan B for me because I probably had to invest in myself financially, and I was not ready for that. So I made the decision to go to grad school in that summer of my senior year.
Okay.
So it's really like, I didn't go about life like not really knowing, because I thought I was doing everything I needed to do, right? But I didn't apply for one cybersecurity job because I just looked at everything as far as qualifications, and I did not have any of that.
Gotcha.
I probably could have, faked it till I make it, like, read up on a few things, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Okay, so in your opinion, were the skills transferable in a sense? Like I'm assuming, I know you said you didn't have like the, I think the 3 to 5 years is really wild.
It's crazy, but that's usually what it starts out at.
I got my own opinions on that, but like, was there like when you looked at it, did it say Java and you had a Java course, or was it like completely
So
all
it
the
was Java
certifications?
course, and then it was the tool sets. Like
Man,
I've never had exposure to this. So I couldn't go in my
yeah,
opinion. And I probably would try it now, right? Because what you know is you get in, certain positions and then you learn
yeah,
all that on
yeah,
the job.
right, right.
But the qualifications at the time were very, very, like out of my league pretty much. Like there's no way. There's no
So,
way I'm gonna get a role like this. But I would say that the couple programming courses, yeah, I could, speak on those. But everything else that I thought I would be interested in, no.
okay. So I want to pivot just a bit, but since you're still at an HBCU, it's not a color issue at this point or ethnicity issue. How did you feel just being a woman in tech? And then like were your courses mostly male? Because like one of the problems if you go to a PWI, there's nobody that really looks like you, not men or
Right.
women. And then but even if you're at a HBCU, what was your classroom like? Was it a lot of women in there? And if there was, did you guys kind of like cling to each other? Like what was that atmosphere specifically for maybe the young ladies that may watch and may be intimidated? Because I want to ask a couple more questions about
Sure.
that as well. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say my classroom, the ratio between women to men at Valley, I would say there was actually a little bit more women that stayed after
Interesting.
that first year.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah, my freshman year it was definitely more men. And
Okay.
then sophomore year, there's more women
It
that
start
stayed.
dwindling. It start dwindling out.
We stuck together, right? So it was like more women, like, okay, it's like 4 or 5 of us, like we got to graduate together, right? That's just kind of how I looked at it. And then I had like really like a study group, and it became more like 4 of us that really just grinded
Mm,
together. It was two guys and me and my best friend that really just got through literally everything. If it was homework, projects, and all that, we relied on each other very heavily. But a woman in tech, I would definitely say it's like intimidating in many ways, right? Because I'm looking at my male peers and I'm like, you all just get this.
mm,
So I start to sit
mm,
back and try to understand what is your like reasoning, right? Like, how are you solving these problems? Like, how are you thinking
mm,
differently than me? And so
mhm,
again, I'm like big on trying to label what it is so I can figure it out for myself. Like, okay, am I not thinking logically? Like, what is
mhm.
happening? Because why can't I solve the problem the same way that you're solving it, right?
Uh,
Because they could just get it. And me, it just took a little longer. I think eventually, of course, I would get to that point, but it took me way longer than some of my male peers. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm just like, like I'll lean on you all for that though. Like I
no,
learned that's something that I could do, right? If you understood and I did it, I'm leaning on you heavy for that.
no, I love that you're honest. That
Oh yeah.
because I think it's a real thing to be
Yeah.
intimidated. Period in tech, but especially if you don't have necessarily that background, I think it can be extremely intimidating. Um, but to just be like, hey, I don't know this, but I'm gonna figure it out. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Um,
Had to.
so okay, so there wasn't a lot of issues there. You got a study group. You get to junior. Oh no, we're going into your masters. How'd you
Mhm.
decide your school? Was it tough? Did you still like? How did you know what to major in for your masters? Like, how did you decide all of that? Do you have a mentor at this point?
Okay, so you asked a few questions there. So how did I choose a school? North Carolina A&T was my
Yeah.
first choice, actually.
Okay. Okay.
So I thought I was going to North Carolina A&T, but I ended up getting my full ride from Valley
Mm,
before I even got my acceptance letter from North Carolina A&T. So now we're in the summer, like I have to make a decision, like where are you going to school? That pressure was definitely on. I will say I waited, right? So I don't recommend this to anybody probably watching, but I waited as long as possible till I got my acceptance letter from North Carolina A&T. So I pushed back accepting my full academic scholarship of Valley
mm,
just to see what I
mm.
was going to get from A&T. Don't recommend that. Probably follow up a little bit more. I probably could have done that, but I was trying to see, am I going to get in? Am I going to have the
Right.
same
Right.
opportunities? Like I already
Right.
knew like other schools were just way too expensive. So I wrote them out quick, but I'm like, there's an opportunity I can get into the school that I really want to for free. And then when I got that letter, and I'm just like, they're not giving me a full academic scholarship. So
Did
now
you
I'm
did
calling
you
them. Go ahead.
did Did you at all leverage the Valley State? Like, hey, this is what they're giving me. Are you guys gonna come with me?
Yeah, that's pretty that's where I was with it. Like, hey, I'm having a full academic scholarship here. Like, what can you all offer me? Oh, this is the most we could do. I'm like, dang, I'm
Yeah,
probably
okay,
really gonna have
okay.
to go to Valley. And so at this time, I had never been in Itabena, Mississippi. So it's like North
Mm.
Mississippi. It actually snows up there. I don't even know what the campus looks like. All I know is in the country. But I'm like, I have a full academic scholarship. I'm going. That's just literally my mindset at that point.
And just so I'm clear, you're from Pittsburgh. You're from the
I'm
city
from
of
Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh.
Pennsylvania. Yep.
Now, it's not often people leave the city. It's
No.
definitely not often that they're maneuvering through these. This
Yeah.
isn't just like North Carolina or Atlanta. This is
Right.
like Mississippi's. Not, everybody doesn't go to Mississippi. So,
No.
uh, what was your thoughts on that? Like, how did you? Because I'm saying that because some people move to a city because they have family there, they have people
Yeah.
they can lean on.
Mhm.
Did you have any relatives? Did you know
I
anybody
did.
down there? Okay, okay,
Yeah. So
okay.
I'm actually very well traveled. So I lived in multiple states, and always went back to Pittsburgh. So that was home for
Mm,
us. But my godparents lived in Moss Point, which is a coast of
okay.
Mississippi. So my senior year, my mom decided to move back to New Mexico, right? Crazy, crazy story. How did she get there? Why did she move? I'm like, wow, I have to make a decision. I didn't want to go to New Mexico. I'm like, but I have family in Mississippi. I went there literally every summer since I was a child. So very well traveled. It wasn't, that space was not unfamiliar to me because the coast, the body of waters, I knew
Mm,
people in
mm,
that area. But North Mississippi, again, is very impoverished, I would say.
mm,
But
mm.
I did have family, somewhat close. They were hours away, but they were definitely somewhat close.
Just a small question. We don't have to stay there, but like, what's the connection from like the actual people in the cities and the towns to the university? Like, what is that like?
Oh,
Because
that's home.
okay, okay,
That's like home for them. So
okay,
like where my school is, people literally grew up across across the highway. So
okay.
Valley to them was like high school in some way. Like they could
Got
come to
you,
the public campus,
got
like
you.
you could walk around the campus and stuff like that. So a lot of people from that area were literally like on the campus as they were children. Like they grew up in a college town, right? Although it's very small, they were in a college town.
Got you. Now, do you have a mentor? We're in our master's degree. Did did you find a mentor yet? And if not, oh no, you said you didn't get one until your professional career.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the master's degree.
Mhm.
How are you getting through that? What does the curriculum look like? What are the courses? Talk me through that.
Very, very similar to undergrad, but again, very focused in
Mm,
cybersecurity. So like I'm enjoying this now. I'm like, oh, okay, like
okay.
these are things that are going to help me. And it's so interesting to say it out loud, but it's like because I have an interest in it, I'm going to really be like driven to learn more, like have like more of a keen interest in things that could probably help me be successful in life. Like, if you
Mm,
go about doing things that you're not interested in, you like social studies, right? We talked about that earlier. Like I have no interest in social studies, history, none of that. So yes, I can get it done, but am I going to put my full effort or attention into learning it? Not as much, right? It's
okay.
just kind of one of those things you do to get by. But now I'm like really understanding concepts, things of that sort that can actually help me advance, in my
Mm.
career.
When was it? What year do you think it was, or was it in your master's degree where you felt comfortable when you felt like I got a handle of this?
Um, I would say so. I'm sorry. So let me go back. So my program was 2 years. I finished in a year and a half. So really after that first year, so I had an internship with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory after my first year. But I understood those concepts in and out. A lot of those things were pretty much easy. Those programming classes that were still there, right? Because you do have to have those. Those were definitely a little difficult in my first year of grad school. Definitely requires way more attention than undergrad. But again, I applied some of those things I learned in undergrad and brought them to grad school. Like, hey, like we need a team. Like we need to figure this out together. Like let's not go about it just trying to figure this out alone. Like there's going to require a few people in a room to collaborate, come to an understanding so we can, get to where we need to go. So I applied a lot of that and I was able to be successful in that way. But I knew
Now,
it
is
was
it
cybersecurity for sure. Like this is what I want to do.
now? What does the finals look like? Because we know we got English
Oh,
finals.
crazy.
What is a computer science, cybersecurity focused master's final look like? What is it? A project based? Is it like, what does it look
So
like?
you have the tests, and then some are project based. Like I had a web design class, like we actually coded like an app. Then one was like you actually code like a website and you kind of had to present that. But then some of them were like those tests. I'm not the best test taker. Why? I'm over analytical, right? So I'm looking at all these questions like, two of these look right, but am I right? So it was always that. Like that's just a challenge I realized like I'm probably gonna have for the rest of my life. And it's going to require me to study extra hard. So I'm confident going into anything that I do, right? So I have to apply that literally to this day. I have to have that same mindset. Like if I go in for a certification, I'm gonna have to study really hard. Why? Because I'm looking at two answers and I'm like, I may be right, but more likely there's a possibility I'm wrong. So it's just like, you never know. But finals, crazy. I feel like it was a make or break type of situation because you want to maintain a certain GPA. So my department chair in grad school was like, you don't need to drop below a 3.4 if you want a good job. I'm like, oh, like this is, whew, all right. So now I'm looking at my classes like, okay, I get an A here, I get an A here. If I get a C here, oh, like I can't do it. So the pressure's on to maintain A's and, like depending on the numeric value and how they assess, right? So like 89 may be an A in another class, 89 in another class may be a B. So like you really, really want to put your best foot forward. And that's all I
Gotcha.
could do. Having that in mind, like I have to be successful. And this is what it requires. Like the pressure's on literally the first day I spoke to my department chair, because he was also my graduate advisor. There was a lot of stress. I'm not gonna lie, it was a lot of stress.
Got you. But I see you still used your strategy, like you broke it down.
Oh
That's
yeah.
pretty good. All right, so you get through your master's degree.
Mhm.
You're in cybersecurity now. What is the job market? How do you get to? Because I know we end up at Disney.
Mhm.
Um, did you take
Yeah.
a couple other positions? When does the mentor kick in?
Mhm.
Um, and how are you feeling at the end of your, as you're about to graduate with your master's? Where's your mind at?
So I took my position with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory before I even graduated from grad school. So I knew I planned everything out, right? I said I want to start my job by January. And I knew I was, graduating that spring because I finished in a year and a half. And I know I was going back because they offered me my full-time position at the end of my summer internship. So that was, a great opportunity. But I knew to position myself like that. A place that I wanted to work, I wanted to make sure that I had an internship there. I had a couple of opportunities, but I'm like, okay, if I get a job at Booz Allen Hamilton, do I want to stay in Atlanta? If I get this job with NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, do I want to stay in California? So I was like, let me position myself to make the most money, go to California, another foreign place. I'd never visited LA before my internship. Well, the interview first and then the internship, because I knew I wanted to make a certain amount of money starting off. And then getting in there, I'm just like, okay, like I can navigate this space a little bit. I understood what I needed to do. I didn't have a mentor immediately in my internship, but when I'm, now started and grounded, I had, I guess you consider them like a sponsor and mentor. So I was working for the Chief Information Security Officer, and then the associate CIO at the time was a Black woman. She was my mentor. I leaned on her heavily for navigating my career, because I'm like, I don't see too many of us in this space. So how did you get there? What did you, are there things that you needed to do? Are there things you needed to learn to get to where you are today?
Can you share some of that advice? What were
Sure.
those things? What information did she give to you?
So so one of the major things she said that kind of stuck out is just ask those questions and start networking, right? So I'm like, okay, that means I need to start networking with more of the people I work with, even if, like we just have maybe one project together or not, but it was leaning on a lot of the things that they do so I can position myself to learn from them. Like sometimes we go about our day-to-day jobs and we're not really understanding what anybody has to do necessarily, right? It's just how do you contribute to my project? And are you getting it done? But I started leaning on them heavy on the networking side, like, okay, let's have coffee chats. What do you do? Like, how long have you been here? How did you get to this, executive role, or, being a senior manager, things of that sort. So that was one thing. But also it was almost like she kind of said, you had to have tough skin, but without saying that. And I say that in layman's terms because I did feel sometime I was isolated because I was a young Black woman and I came in like, I know my stuff a little bit, right? So I just got my master's degree. I feel like I'm in my bag. Like a lot of y'all don't have master's degrees in here. Y'all been on a job probably 10 years. So you have tenure and you've learned it. But I also feel like I deserve to be in a room. But I did realize that sometimes they're going to look at me a certain way because I am at the table, right? A young Black woman, the only young Black woman at this table. And sometimes my tasks required me to tell them what to do. A lot of people weren't comfortable with that. And so she was like, you know, like sometimes you don't take everything personal and understand what that relationship looks like. You know, like if that's me asking certain questions or not saying, you know, not being offended, easily offended, you know, by certain things that people say, by their tone, because sometimes just people are who they are, and not saying that you're a bad person, you're not doing everything right. It's just that's who they are. They come into the room demanding that type of attention. And so I'm like, okay, now my skin is a little tougher after I had that conversation, because a couple of times I'm like, I'm ready to cry. Like these people are like me. Like it's like dog eat dog world out here. Like, am I going to survive? Because I'm the only one in the room, and who's fighting for me if it's not her? You know, but I did feel like I had her at arm's reach if I did have any issues. Like, you know what, I'm going to your boss's boss. You know, like I did feel like I had that, you know, leverage a little bit. But I also wanted to hold my own in a room because I feel like I'm representing us. That was a big part of it, right? So like I'm carrying myself a certain way. I'm having certain conversations where people understood not only that, yes, I'm a Black woman in tech, yes, I have this mastery, but I can do the job just as good.
Got you. And then are you still, you still in contact with your mentor, or did?
Yes, yep, I'm still in contact with her.
Okay. So you got your first mentor, you're building up your tough skin. What were you doing at the company specifically, and did you leave? Did you eventually leave?
Yes. So I was a computer security engineer, which is to me a very generic term. But I was working on a lot of compliance and governance work for our chief information security officer. So that was actually my first manager, going through a lot of his initiatives. And then I got into data analytics. So now I'm building dashboards around compliance and governance work. And then I'm like, wait, is this going to be transferable outside of the role that I'm doing? So I had to, again, try to figure out, do I need to pivot, leave the company? Because it's probably after the second or third year, right? I felt like I was grateful for the opportunity, foot in the door, but I'm like, is this going to hold value outside of the company? Because now people are looking at me like, you work for NASA. So now they're reaching out on LinkedIn, things of that sort. And I'm like, okay, well, could I leave at any time, go to a company, make more money, or do I need to stay here and learn a little bit more, right? So now I'm going through that process of figuring out what other skills do I need to acquire while I'm there. So I started, again, doing more data analytics work. I started doing threat hunting, which was new, like more of a new program for the company, but I was acquiring as much as I needed to. Like I built my own rotational because I wanted to understand what I needed to do eventually to leave. I hate to say it like that because I knew that wasn't going to be where I was going to stay. So after that 4 or 5 year mark, I was like, yes, it's time to go. And then so I left in 2020.
Now, when you're saying you're doing these other projects and you're learning, like how did your position allow for that? Like how does that work when you're in a space like that?
I start having uncomfortable conversations. So I had to pick up another mentor to figure out, how do I get out of these roles? Like I talked to her actually literally today. She was like, you know what, like you have to show them that you're ready to pass this information along to someone else, but you have to propose that. If not, they're not going to, you know, just say it's time for you to get out. It's like you kind of have to state where you're trying to go, provide a solution, right? So I pretty much built a whole plan around relieving myself of that work and being able to pass it on. And then I could see myself doing something else. And it was more like a conversation. I set up a meeting one day. I told my manager, like, this is kind of what I want to do. And I went through the PowerPoint and I'm like, and I'll be ready to pass this on in 2 to 3 months. That was it. And good thing he was very receptive of it, but that was like how I started navigating a little bit more. It was very uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie. I was like shook, like, oh my God. I'm telling this man what I want to do. Is he going to, be able to help me? Right. Because at the end of the day, it's his call. If he said no, I'd have been like, yeah, I gotta go. But I was able to stay within the company doing something different.
Got you. So having those tough conversations really
Very
moved your
tough,
head.
very uncomfortable, I'll say, because you think people are vested in you, but sometimes you have to speak up for yourself, right? You have to tell them like, hey, I'm capable of doing something else. And you have to provide a solution sometimes to allow for it.
Got you. Okay, so then you leave. How do you decide to get to Disney? Tell us what you do there. And then as we wrap up,
Sure.
we'll talk about some mentoring and the future for you and stuff like that.
Okay. So leaving was hard. But I knew it was time to go. Like you kind of have a gut feeling like when it's time to pivot, like have I done everything that I needed to do here? I built all the great relationships, but I'm not honestly seeing the money that I want to. I'm living in LA as a single Black woman. It's tough. So it was time to leave. And also I feel like some of the work that I was doing just was not going to be valued as much outside of the company if I would have stayed, longer. So I left. I'm going to say at the end of 2020, I had put in like, it's time for me to go. But I had another opportunity lined up with a small business called Sitiparks, which provides a SaaS solutions for telehealth, which, those conversations now people have with their therapists, psychologists, whoever it may be, like in a virtual setting like this. And so of course, around COVID times, that was perfect, right? Because now I'm learning the medical industry, but also being able to do cybersecurity with them. Did that, but let me back up a little bit because I had already had a conversation with my now manager at Disney. It was very informal, but I had that conversation because someone that used to work at JPL, she considered me, right? Like, oh, there's this role coming. You may be interested in at Disney. And she was my manager when I was an intern. She left and went to Disney. So that's how that connection was made. LinkedIn is very important. I will say that LinkedIn is very important to keep those connections because when people leave, they may consider you for the work that you're doing. And that's pretty much what took place. So we stayed connected on LinkedIn. She linked me and my manager, informal conversation. I felt like it went great. So now I'm like, I'm going to Disney when I leave JPL. That's what I'm thinking. It took 7 months to get there. So they had like, they weren't hiring people. It's like it was a hiring freeze at the time, which I didn't know the inner workings. I'm just like, well, I thought we had a good conversation, but no one's reached out. I haven't heard the roles open. So I left because I knew it was time to leave. So I went to that company I mentioned, Sitiparks, for 4 months. And my manager sent me an email and said, hey, this role is now open, which is a senior security specialist. I'm like, oh, this is deep. I just left my job for another job and I've only been here for 4 months. Love my manager. We had a great rapport, at this small business, but I'm like, I'm gonna have to tell this man I'm gonna leave. And honestly, I'm confused. I've never heard anybody do that before. So I'm like, how does that look in an industry, right? Of course, I can't come back because I feel like I've burned the bridge, even if it was a great opportunity. And then not knowing if the grass is greener on the other side was something else that had me like uncomfortable for a while. But I did, weigh the pros and the cons of everything. Glad I pivoted when I did, because now the salary I was making with my new company was in comparison to, what Disney had to look at compared to, what I would have been making from JPL. So I left at a perfect time. I say all that to say I left at a perfect time. So they considered that to be a thing, and also title. But I would say I did what I needed to do. I left the company after 4 months and went to Disney and became a senior security specialist, which I still hold that title today. And that work that I do is around governance, risk, and compliance for our applications that we use in-house. So we have a corporate segment. And so all the applications like Teams, Zoom, any collaboration messaging that we have in-house, I support those and making sure that they're in compliance with our policies and standards.
Got you. So a bit of negotiating to get there.
Yeah.
But you're finally there now. Have you picked up any more mentors? And
Yes,
it seems
I
like
did.
being that you didn't have mentors, do you do mentoring yourself, or
Oh,
how
yeah.
does that work?
Heavily. So to answer your first question, yes, I actually picked up a couple more mentors. So Deanna Craighead, as you probably have spoken with. Yeah, she actually was my mentor. I reached out to Deanna. One, she was having a great conversation on the panel. I want to say it was about DE&I at the time, but also about tech and, you know, just her role and what she does. I'm like, oh, this is an admirable woman. Like, I see myself in her, you know, like I can be this woman. Like, so representation is definitely important. And then I'm like, wait, she's from Pittsburgh. When she said she was from Pittsburgh, I reached out almost immediately, like, we have to connect. Like, you don't meet too many women, Black women from Pittsburgh doing what we do, right? So I reached out to her immediately. That's one mentor. And then I have another mentor that she actually connected me with because he's in cybersecurity. So he also works for the Walt Disney Company. And being that we have some of the same work, we do similar things or whatever, you know, she felt like that was a great connection to make. So sometimes your mentor can help you get another mentor. Crazy enough, but it works. And I realized you do have to have mentors at different levels of your life, different areas of life. Like if you want to learn business, if you want to learn entrepreneurship, consulting, you may need a mentor for all of those different areas. So I do have a mentor outside of, you know, Deanna, and then I have an assigned mentor through a career advanced development program we have at Disney for the minorities. Hopefully she becomes a sponsor because she's like a, you know, an executive. She's like a VP as well. And she's networked me around a few places or with people as well. So I have a few within the company, not too many outside of the company, but I am looking for a new mentor outside of the company as well. And to answer your last question, love mentoring. Like that's my way of giving back. In many ways, I feel like super passionate about it. Like I'll be like on a podium ready to cry when I start telling my story and helping people figure out what's next for them because I didn't have that, right? So I'll talk to kids, I'll talk to, you know, young adults. I even speak to adults, you know, like I have a mentoring circle within the company just so we can network amongst each other and help one another, you know, uplift and inspire each other to do more, you know, for ourselves because we need that. We don't talk about all of the struggles that we have amongst ourselves so we can help one another, right? So like I've experienced that before. I don't want you to go through it. So this will save you time, money, pain, sweat, and tears if you do it this way. So I have that. But I mentor HBCU students, love them. One of my mentees, excuse me, me and her are really, really close inside and outside of work. So highly recommend doing that. And I think just in general, for me, the work that I do is not just about myself. I feel like, yes, to have a great title, cybersecurity is great. But once I reach a certain level, it's like, what are you really doing for the people that come after you, right? So I feel like I'm paving the way, even if I am the only one and representing certain spaces, but I know I'm doing it for somebody else. So the great work that I do to protect the company is one thing, but also for those that want to get into tech.
Gotcha. Last question. You know, knowing that tech is the future, what's your opinion on how do we get the younger kids and younger generation involved? And then how can people reach you?
Definitely want to expose them to as much as possible. So if that's coding, if that's cybersecurity, if that's networking, networks, you know, things of that sort. So the different areas of tech, exposure to that is important. And everybody doesn't want to be hands-on tech. Like you can get into project management, things of that sort. So there's other aspects of tech to get into, but knowing what those opportunities are important. So if you have workshops, bringing people in from different cities and stuff like that, I think is very helpful, right? So if you have a group of people that are determined, you know, to pour into others, I think just having like a panel of them telling people what they do, right? Because what we do in today's society is the same thing that kids are doing for, you know, looking at us like, I want to be heard because it looks cool, it sounds cool. But if they don't know, they don't know.
Gotcha. I think we'll end it there. Thank you, Nicola Sandidge from Disney.
Thank you so much. Yes, you can follow me on LinkedIn.
Make sure you follow her at LinkedIn. And I appreciate you coming on, man, and telling your story.
Thank you.